She spent her life caring for her children, but when she needed them, no one came. That's what they'll say. That's what they're saying now that I'm gone, and they'd be right. But it's so much more complicated than that, so much heavier. I'm Josephine. Josephine Rose Holloway. At least that's the name I was given. For the last 70 years, I was just Jo. Just Mom. Just the woman who existed in the background of everyone else's life. I died on a Tuesday, March 14th. A plain, ordinary Tuesday in the rain. That sad, persistent kind that turns the world gray. I remember thinking, as I lay on the kitchen floor waiting for the dark, that I should have vacuumed. What a ridiculous thought. But that's what motherhood does to you. Even at the end, you worry about the mess you're leaving behind. I want to tell you how it got to that Tuesday. Not the sanitized version they'll tell at the funeral, not the simple story of a mother abandoned. I want you to understand the weight of it all. How a woman who stitched prom dresses and packed lunches and sat through 1,000 soccer games in the Ohio cold, how that woman ended up alone on a linoleum floor with no one to hold her hand. I met Walt in 1948. I was 19, working the register at Woolworth's in downtown Dayton. He was fresh from the war, with those haunted eyes so many of them had. But when he smiled at me, I felt seen, like I was the first soft thing he'd touched in years. We married 6 months later in a small church in Oakwood, cake made by his mother, a borrowed dress. I didn't care about the simplicity. I only cared about the promise that we'd build something together. We bought the house in 1952, 1427 Elm Ridge Drive, a split level in a development carved out of farmland, 3 bedrooms, 1.5 baths, a yard that flooded in the spring. But Walt built the back deck himself, hand-sawing each board on his days off, and I planted a dogwood tree in the front yard, just a twig really, stubborn roots and thin branches. I watered it with dishwater and prayed over it like it was a child. It grew. Of course it grew. I made sure everything grew. Kate came first, in 1953, a squalling, red-faced thing that didn't sleep for 2 years. I was 24 and exhausted down to my soul, but I loved her with a fierceness that terrified me. Tom followed in 1955. My boy, my golden child. He had Walt's laugh, deep and rolling, filling the whole house. Ray arrived in 1958, unexpected and sensitive, a child who felt everything too much. And Victoria, little Vicky, in 1962. She was the one I thought would stay close, the one who'd crawl into my bed during thunderstorms and whisper secrets like prayers. I made everything from scratch, not because it was fashionable, but because we couldn't afford not to. I stretched ground beef with breadcrumbs. I sewed Halloween costumes from old curtains and discount fabric. I patched knees, kissed boo-boos, sat up with croupy coughs at 3 a.m., the smell of Vicks vapor rubs seeping into my skin like permanent perfume. Walt worked double shifts. I stayed home. That was the deal. He provided the money. I provided everything else. And I was so good at it. When Kate got her period at 11, she cried and I held her and told her she was a woman now, even though she was still my little girl. When Tom broke his wrist falling from the oak tree, I didn't scold him. I wrapped him in a blanket and sang to him in the ER for 4 hours. When Ray was bullied for wearing handmade shoes, I took an extra job mending clothes for neighbors to buy her store-bought loafers. I wanted them all to fit in, to be happy, to know they were loved. By 1965, the house was full of noise, full of laundry, full of the particular chaos that 4 children bring. I was a chauffeur, a chef, a nurse, a tutor, a referee. I fell asleep every night with a to-do list scrolling behind my eyelids. And I was happy. At least I think I was. It's hard to remember now what happiness felt like when it was intertwined with such constant exhaustion. But there was a purpose to it, a beautiful, shining purpose. I was raising people. I was building a family that would be my legacy, my shelter in old age. That's what we were promised, wasn't it? That's the bargain every mother makes, even if she doesn't say it out loud. I will give you everything, and in return, you will be my people. You will be my home. I didn't know then how cruel that bargain could become.
The years blur. That's the thing about motherhood. The finest details are etched in acid, but the days themselves melt into one another like watercolor in rain. I remember the smell of Tom's football jersey after a game, that particular teenage stink of grass and sweat and cheap deodorant. I remember the exact shade of pink nail polish Kate wanted for her 16th birthday, the way Ray's hair curled at the nape of her neck when she was concentrating, and Vicky's lisp, biscotti instead of spaghetti, until she was 8 years old. These are the things I held on to. These are the things that would later haunt the empty rooms. Walt and I became a team, a well-oiled machine. We didn't talk much in those middle years. We didn't need to. He'd come home at 6, dinner would be on the table, meatloaf, mashed potatoes, green beans from the garden. The kids would jabber over each other, vying for attention, and I'd referee while Walt nodded silently. Then he'd help with dishes, and I'd fold laundry, and we'd fall into bed too tired for anything but sleep. That was love, too. Not the passionate kind from the movies. The kind that builds a life, brick by brick, load of laundry by load of laundry. Kate went to college in 1971, Ohio State. I packed every box myself, wrapping her dishes in my good tea towels because we couldn't afford bubble wrap. I cried for 3 days after we dropped her off in Columbus. The house felt too quiet. I wrote her letters every week without fail on that thin airmail paper. She'd call on Sundays, collect, and we'd talk for exactly 3 minutes because that's all we could afford. I lived for those calls. Tom left in 1973, football scholarship to Michigan. He was going to be a big-shot engineer. I was terrified but proud. Ray drifted after high school. Community college, then dropping out, then moving in with a boyfriend I didn't trust. I called her every other day. She'd get annoyed. "Mom, I'm fine. Stop hovering." But how do you stop being a mother? You just learn to call less, to push the worry down like a lid on a boiling pot. Vicky left in 1980, full ride to Northwestern. She was going to be a journalist. I remember standing in her empty bedroom after she left, the walls stripped of her posters, the bed just a mattress. I sat on the floor and cried. It was a different cry. It wasn't ending. The job was done. They were all launched. They were all gone. Walt died in 1985. A heart attack, sudden at the shop. They said he was dead before he hit the floor. I suppose that's a blessing, not to suffer. But for me, it was a theft. He was supposed to be here for the next part, the part where it was just us again, where we'd sit on that deck he built and drink coffee and watch the dogwood tree bloom. We'd earned that, hadn't we? But life doesn't care what you've earned. It just takes. The first Thanksgiving I spent alone was 1987. Kate invited me to Chicago, but David's mother was going to be there. It might be awkward, Mom. Tom and Karen went to Florida with her family. Ray, who knew where Ray was. Vicky was covering a story in D.C. So I made a turkey breast for one. Just a breast, not the whole bird. I set the table with my good china, the pattern I'd registered for when I married Walt. I even lit a candle. It looked pathetic. The food tasted like ash. I threw most of it away and sat in Walt's recliner, watching reruns of Murder, She Wrote until I fell asleep. That's when I first felt it. The crack. Small, but deep. A hairline fracture in the foundation of everything I'd built. The phone calls became less. Or maybe I became more aware of their absence. I'd call Kate on a Sunday evening and she'd answer rushed, "Mom, can I call you back? The kids have soccer." She never called back. I'd call Tom's office. His secretary would take a message that disappeared into some void. Ray would answer hi or angry or both. Vicky was the hardest. She'd talk to me, but it was like talking to a polite stranger. "How are you, Mom?" "That's good." "Oh, that's too bad." "Listen, I have a deadline, but I'll call you next week." Next week never came. I made excuses for them. That's what mothers do. We're the best liars in the world, especially to ourselves. Kate is overwhelmed. Tom is climbing the corporate ladder. Ray is struggling, but she'll find her way. Vicky's work matters. They're just busy. Aren't we all? I filled my days with busyness, too. I joined the garden club. I went to church. I volunteered at the library, stamping due dates and books that smelled of other people's lives. I had a few friends, women like me, widowed, their children scattered. We'd have coffee and talk about our surgeries and our grandchildren, their grandchildren, the ones I barely saw. Then came the money talk. Subtle at first. Kate mentioned that real estate in Dayton wasn't what it used to be. Tom asked in passing if I'd thought about downsizing. Vicky mentioned something about equity and long-term planning. They weren't wrong. The house was too big for one old woman. The stairs were getting harder. But the house wasn't just a house. It was the proof that Walt and I had built something, that our lives had meant something. The dogwood tree was taller than the roof now. Every spring it bloomed white and furious, a ghost of the stick I'd planted 50 years before. I held on. I told them I was fine. I told myself that asking them for help, real help, not a 10-minute phone call, would be a burden. And mothers don't burden their children. We carry the burdens. That's the job. That's always been the job. Ray came to stay for a week in 1998. It was a disaster. She was detoxing, though I didn't know it at the time. She slept all day, raged at night. She stole $50 from my purse. When I confronted her, she cried and said I never loved her like I loved the others, that she was always the problem child. And I held her, that 40-year-old woman who smelled of sour sweat and failure, and I rocked her like she was my baby again. And I told her that wasn't true. But maybe it was. Maybe I'd been so busy raising them I hadn't seen her drowning. She left in the middle of the night. Took my bid silverware, the set Walt's mother gave us. I didn't report it. I just sat at the kitchen table, looking at the empty drawer, and felt another crack spiderweb across my heart. It was November 3rd, 2016, 3 days after my 87th birthday. No one had called. Not one of them. I had gotten cards. Kate's was a generic thing from a drugstore, signed, "Love the Family." No personal note. Tom's was belated, postmarked a week later. Ray's never came. Vicky sent an e-card. An e-card for my 87th birthday? It played a tune I couldn't figure out how to turn off, so I just closed the laptop and let it sing to itself. I decided to make myself a proper dinner, a roast chicken. I still had the energy then. I pulled it from the refrigerator, a small bird, just for me. I set it on the counter to season it. I remember the smell of rosemary. I grew it in a pot on the windowsill. It was the last thing I grew that thrived. And then my hip gave out. Just gave. A grinding, sickening pop, and I was on the floor. The impact knocked the wind out of me. I couldn't move my right leg. The pain was white hot, blinding. I tried to drag myself, but it was impossible. So I lay there, on the kitchen floor, the linoleum cold against my cheek. I had my phone. It was in my apron pocket. I pulled it out, my hands shaking. The screen was blurry. I pressed Kate's name. It rang and rang. Voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Kate. Leave a message." My voice, when it came out, was a stranger's. Thin, panicked. "Kate, it's Mom. I fell. I think I broke something. Please call me back?" I called Tom. It went straight to voicemail. I didn't leave a message. What was the point? I called Ray. It rang, and then she answered. "Mom?" She sounded high or drunk or both. "I fell, honey. I need help. Can you call someone for me? An ambulance?" A pause. A long, awful pause. "Mom, I'm in Reno. I can't help you right now. Call Susan. Call Kate. Call Tom." I did. They didn't. "Mom, I gotta go. I'm at work. Call 911 yourself." Click. I stared at the phone. I called Vicky. It rang 4 times. She answered. "Mom, is everything okay?" No, everything is not okay. I fell. I'm on the floor. I need... Oh my God, okay, listen. I'm gonna conference in Kate and Tom. We'll figure this out. Just hold on. I heard the clicks as she added them. Kate's voice, irritated. "Mom, I'm in the middle of dinner. What's this about?" "Mom fell. She's hurt. She needs help." Tom, "Mom, did you call 911? "No, I called you. I didn't want to..." "Mom, you need to call 911. That's what you do. We can't do anything from here." "Kate, is this serious? Or did you just slip? Can you get up?" I can't move my leg. The pain..." "Vicky, I'm calling 911 from here. I'll have them dispatch." "No," Kate interrupted. "If it's not serious, that's a huge bill. Ambulances are expensive, Mom. Do you have your Medicare card? Do you know what hospital you want?" I lay there, listening to them discuss me like I was a logistical problem, a line item in their busy lives. My hip was screaming. The floor was getting colder as the sun went down. The chicken sat on the counter, raw and waiting. Finally, Vicky said, "I'm calling. Hold on, Mom." She disconnected the others. I heard her dialing, giving my address. She stayed on the line with me until I heard the ambulance. "Okay, Mom, they're coming. I have to go. I have a deadline, but Kate will meet you at the hospital, okay? She's closer." Kate did not meet me at the hospital. No one did. The paramedics were kind. They wrapped me in a blanket. They lifted me onto the gurney with practiced ease. One of them,
A young woman with blonde braids held my hand. She said, "You're going to be okay, sweetheart." Sweetheart. A stranger called me sweetheart. My own children called me mom with a sigh. At the hospital, they confirmed it. A fractured hip. Surgery was needed. They asked for my emergency contact. I gave them Kate's number. They called. Voicemail. They left a message. No one called back. I spent 3 days in that hospital bed waiting. Nurses checked on me. A social worker came by, concerned. "Is there no one, Mrs. Holloway?" she asked gently. I lied. I said they were on their way. They were just busy. Very busy. On the 3rd day, Tom called. "Mom, I just got the message. How are you?" He sounded tired, annoyed. "Vicky said you fell. Why didn't you have one of those life alert things?" I don't know." "Well, you should get one. Karen's mother has one. It's a good investment." An investment. Like I was a portfolio. Kate called later that day. "Mom, I'm swamped. The boys are in playoffs. Can you handle this? Can I call you tonight?" She didn't call that night or the next. Ray never called. Vicky texted. A text. "Hope you're feeling better. Let me know what the plan is, XOXO." The plan was that I was an 87-year-old woman with a broken hip and no one to take me home. A neighbor, Dorothy from 2 doors down, came to get me. She'd seen the ambulance. She drove me home, helped me inside, made me tea. She was 70 herself, but spry. She stayed for an hour. It was the most human contact I'd had in months. When she left, I sat in Walt's recliner, my leg propped on pillows, and I stared at the phone. It didn't ring. That was the breaking point, not the fall. The fall was just physics. The breaking point was the silence after. The realization that I had raised 4 children who, when faced with my actual need, had collectively decided I was a problem to be managed, not a mother to be loved. I never recovered, not really. Oh, the hip healed, technically. But I was bent now, a crooked old woman with a walker that squeaked across the floor. I got the life alert. Tom sent it, express mail. He included a note. "Mom, this is for your peace of mind and ours. Love, T." The emphasis on ours was a dagger. It wasn't for me. It was so they wouldn't have to worry, so they could check a box and move on with their lives. The new millennium came, and I felt like a relic. Everyone had computers, cell phones, lives that moved at a speed I couldn't comprehend. I got a flip phone, finally, in 2002. Kate bought it for me, programmed her number and the others into it. "Now we can stay in touch, Mom," she said. But they never called. I'd lie in bed at night, that phone on my nightstand like a tiny glowing promise, and will it to ring, just to check in, just a thinking of you. But it was mostly spam calls about my car warranty. The car had died in '99. I started to forget things, small things at first, where I put my reading glasses, why I'd walked into a room, the name of that actress in that movie. I was 75, 76. This is normal, I told myself. But it scared me. What if I forgot to turn off the stove? What if I took my pills twice? What if I forgot them entirely? I mentioned it to Kate during one of her brief calls. "Oh, Mom, you should see a doctor," she said, distracted. I could hear her typing in the background, emailing, living her life, while I was trying to hold on to mine. I did see a doctor. Dr. Patel, a kind man with gentle eyes. He said it was age-related cognitive decline, not dementia. Not yet. But we should monitor it. He asked if I had family support. I told him, yes, of course. My children, 4 of them, all successful. I lied so smoothly. I smiled so well. He said, "That's wonderful, Mrs. Holloway. You're very lucky." Lucky. What a word. The years after Walt's death blurred together. 2005, 2010, 2015. Time didn't mark itself anymore. Days repeated. I'd wake at dawn, not because I wanted to, but because my bladder demanded it. Make coffee, sit in Walt's recliner, watch the news, watch more TV, sit. I kept the TV on all day, just for voices. The news, game shows, judge shows where people screamed at each other. Company. Sad, pathetic company. But better than the silence. The silence had weight. It pressed down on my chest like a stone. The house fell into disrepair. The gutters clogged, the paint peeled, the basement flooded. I didn't have the money to fix it. I didn't have the strength. I just moved to the upstairs rooms and closed off the bottom level. I lived in a smaller and smaller world. Walt's chair, my bed, the bathroom. That was it. The dogwood tree got diseased. Some kind of blight. The leaves turned brown and fell in July. I called a tree service. They wanted $800 to treat it. I didn't have it. Not after Ray. Not after all the money I'd sent her, hoping to save her. So, I watched it die. I watched it stand there, skeletal, through the winter of 2022. I felt a kinship with that tree. We were both dying from neglect. I stopped going to church. Too hard to get there. Too hard to sit among people with families. I stopped volunteering. My hands shook too much to stamp books. I stopped gardening. My knees wouldn't bend. I just stopped. Betty died in 2021. My neighbor, my friend, heart attack. Her daughter came and emptied her house in a weekend. A dumpster in the driveway, everything tossed. I watched from my window. That would be me. That would be my story. I wondered who would come. If anyone would come. The money ran out. I'd been living on Social Security and the reverse mortgage I was forced to take to survive. The house that was supposed to be my shelter, my proof. It was becoming the thing that would swallow what little I had left. Kate called in 2020, during the pandemic. "Mom, the market is crazy. If you were to sell now, you'd get a great price. You could live like a queen in a retirement community. I didn't want to live like a queen. I wanted to live in my house, with my ghosts, with the pencil marks on the door frame where I had measured their heights. Kate said, "Mom, think about it. Really think about it." I never did. Vicky visited at Christmas 2022, just for the day. The first time she'd been home in 3 years. She walked through the house like a stranger, touching things with a faint look of distaste. "Mom, this wallpaper is so dated. And the carpet, I vacuumed 10,000 times. The wallpaper, Walt and I hung together, both of us laughing, paste on our noses." She left the next morning after a perfunctory hug. "Take care of yourself, Mom." I stood on the porch and watched her car disappear, and I felt the wind blow straight through me. It was March 14th, 2023, a Tuesday, 75 years after I was born. I woke up that morning feeling strange. Not sick exactly, just finished. The rain was that soft, insistent kind. I made my coffee, weak because I was almost out of grounds and didn't have the energy to go to the store. I sat in Walt's recliner. The TV was broken. It had given up the ghost 3 days before, mid-episode. I hadn't called to get it fixed. What was the point? The silence was no worse than the noise. I thought about calling them, just to hear their voices, but I knew the script. Susan would be busy, Tom would be in a meeting, Ray wouldn't answer, Vicky would be polite and distant. I'd be a disruption, an inconvenience, a problem to be solved. So I didn't call. I was hungry, but nothing sounded good. I thought about the chicken still in the freezer, a block of ice and regret. I thought about the dogwood tree, dead in the yard. I thought about Walt, who had left me here, alone, to finish this by myself. For a moment, I was angry at him, which was ridiculous. He hadn't chosen to die, but he had escaped this end. Around noon, I felt a tightness in my chest. Not like the indigestion, deeper, sharper. It spread down my left arm. I knew what it was. I'd seen Walt die. I knew the signs. I sat there in that chair, and I felt my heart stutter, falter, like a car running out of gas on a long, empty road. I looked at the life alert hanging around my neck. I could press it. They'd come. They'd pump my chest. They'd take me to the hospital. And then what? Another surgery?
Another recovery in an empty room. More polite calls. Distant. Another bill. Another burden. My hand hovered over the button, and then it fell to my lap. I thought about my children. I thought about Kate, who had been my pride. Tom, my joy. Ray, my worry. Vicky, my hope. I loved them. I loved them still, with the last beats of this failing heart. But love, I realized, is not a transaction. It is not an investment that pays dividends. Sometimes it is just a one-way street that ends in a cliff. The pain intensified. It felt like being squeezed, like the universe was collapsing in on my chest. I slid from the chair to the floor. It was easier there, closer to Walt. I lay on the carpet, the one I'd vacuumed 1,000 times, and I looked at the ceiling. There was a water stain there in the corner. I'd never noticed it before. Strange what you notice when you're dying. I didn't call out. There was no one to hear. I just lay there and I let it come. The rain tapped on the window. The house creaked, old bones settling. And I thought, in my final coherent moment, that this was the price. The price of giving everything. You end up with nothing, not even yourself. The dark came. It was soft. It was quiet. It was not unwelcome.
They found me 3 days later. Dorothy's daughter, clearing out her mother's house, noticed the mail piling up. She called the police. The officer found me, peaceful, on the floor, the life alert still around my neck, untouched. Kate was the first to arrive. She flew in from Chicago, hysterical, not with grief, I don't think, with guilt. She walked into the house and saw the state of it, the decay, the emptiness, the raw chicken still in the freezer. She saw the life alert. She saw the phone, its screen dark. She called Tom. She called Ray. She even tracked down Vicky in a motel in Arizona. They converged on the house like confused birds, not knowing where to land. Tom was stoic, businesslike. He handled the funeral arrangements. Vicky was quiet, pale. She kept saying, "I didn't know. I didn't know it was this bad." Ray was drunk. She cried the loudest, but it was performative. A child seeking attention, even now. The funeral was well attended. The church ladies came. Dorothy's daughter came. My children stood in the front pew, a united front of bereavement. Kate gave the eulogy. She talked about my devotion, my sacrifices. She cried. People thought it was beautiful. If they only knew. The will was read the following week. A lawyer named Stevens, a young man, read it aloud in an office that smelled of old leather and dust. He'd been hired by me in 2022, paid for with a ring, Robert's mother's diamond, the one I'd promised to Kate. It was the last thing of value I owned. To Kate, I left the china, the pattern she'd once turned her nose up at. To Tom, I left the tools in the garage, rusted now, but they'd been Walt's. To Vicky, I left my wedding ring, simple gold, nothing extravagant. To Ray, I left $10, a symbolic gesture, a punctuation mark on a lifetime of failed rescues. And the house and whatever pittance remained after the reverse mortgage, I left to the Oakwood Public Library to establish a literacy program for children so that someone else's children might be read to, might be cared for, might be seen. That's what the will said, those exact words. The silence in that lawyer's office was profound. Kate made a sound, a sort of choked gasp. Tom's face went hard. Vicky's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of fury. Ray just laughed, that bitter, drunken laugh. She always loved those books more than us. No, I loved you more. That was the problem. I loved you so much I forgot to teach you how to love me back. And in the end, I chose to love something that would love in return. The idea of children, the promise of them, even if they weren't mine. They contested it, of course. Kate hired a lawyer, claimed I wasn't of sound mind. Tom backed her. Vicky wrote a long, angry email about my manipulation. Ray just disappeared again. The case is still pending. Let them fight. Let them spend their money. Let them remember every time they sign a check to their attorney, the mother they left to die on a Tuesday. If you're listening to this, if you're a mother, a child, anyone who's ever been part of a family, know this. Loneliness in old age is not an accident. It is a choice, a series of small, quiet choices to not call, to not visit, to assume someone else will do it, to assume she's fine, to assume there's time. There isn't time. There is only now, only this moment. Pick up the phone, knock on the door, sit in the silence with her, because the mother who raised everyone should never, ever have to die alone. I don't blame them, not entirely. We raise our children in a world that tells them to go, to achieve, to build their own lives, their own families, their own kingdoms. We don't tell them to look back. We don't teach them that the kingdom has a queen, and she's aging, and she's lonely, and she gave them everything. But I do blame them a little for the silence, for the dismissal, for the way they made me feel in those final years, like a burden, like a chore, like a ghost haunting my own life. So yes, I died alone. But I was not lonely at the end. I had the rain. I had the creak of the house. I had the memory of Walt's hand in mine, and the smell of newborn baby hair, and the sound of a 4-part harmony belting out Happy Birthday in a kitchen that smelled of cake. I had the life I built. It wasn't the life I thought I'd have. It wasn't the death I thought I'd deserve. But it was mine. And that was enough.